Welcome to the Personal Podcast, where we get to meet the real personality behind the professional. Today, I am absolutely delighted to welcome Claire Walton, who is a performance coach and best-selling author. Now, as small talk is bound, let's get straight to it, Claire. So, Claire, how many times have you been married?
Well, hit me with the big one straight away. Or have you hit me with the big one straight away? We'll see.
We'll see.
I've actually gone through with it 3 times.
Okay.
I have actually been engaged to be married and with a wedding venue and indeed a wedding dress 4 times.
Wow. And can you tell me a little bit about each chapter of marriage?
Do you know, the first one is, honestly, Charlotte, it's really boring because I got married at 18. I got married too young. I got married because God's honest truth is, and let's hope my mum and dad aren't listening to this, they made me. So this is probably the first time I've been really honest about this, where my father or my mother might actually hear this. But we'd put a deposit down on a house at the age of 18 and 20. So I was 18, he was 20. We'd been together since we were kids at school. And I was just desperate to get out of the house and for us to be a couple together. I mean, this is going back to 1987, early 87.
Right, it's a very different time.
Yeah, yeah. And so I said this to my father was the one who was absolutely adamant, a very traditional man back then, and said, you have to get married if you want to live in this house. That you've, that he didn't know we'd put the deposit down. I was saying I wanted to. That was the little lie, the little white lie, if you like, because I'd already done it. So we did. 3 months later, we were married, 100 people at the wedding, and that was that. And then 2 years later, we were getting divorced. Bless.
Just not the right person.
Well, do you know what? I actually said to my current other half that had we, the one that I got married to at 18, had we met now, we might be together. Because I've lived a life now, but I hadn't lived a life. And I got the impression, and do you know what? I might be wrong. I have no idea what he's doing these days. But I got the impression back then that he was settled and that was it. And that was our lives. And we wouldn't do anything very exciting. So, I got itchy feet.
I don't blame you at 18. And I do think you're right as well. Timing is critical in relationship. Time is critical in everything in life. Mm-hmm. But and it blows my mind sometimes when you think that the right person, they don't have to be the right person, but it has to also be the right time for you that they come into your life. So so that was number 1. What was the story with number 2?
Okay. So number 2 I was with for quite a few years, again, leading up to, but an adult at least this time, leading up to the getting married. And in all honesty, this is a little bit more sad, I've got to be honest. This one I married to try, I guess it's one of those old ones, to try and make it work. It was kind of my, it's not working. I need to prove to him that he doesn't have to be in what I would describe as him behaving in such an insecure way. So I think it was him playing out his insecurities in all the various different things that he did that were a bit of an issue for me. And I'm sure I'll have done things that were an issue for him. And I just wanted to fix it. I'm a bit of a fixer. So I wanted to fix it. And of course, I felt like I'd failed the first time round as well. So, even though I wasn't married at this stage, it was my second big relationship and I didn't want to fail. And so we got married for me to fix it. And less than 2 years later, we got divorced. There's something about 2 years.
Yeah, the 2-year itch is a new thing. Fair enough. Number 3, or was there an engagement in between?
Yes, yes. You'd think you'd heard this story before, and you haven't.
I haven't.
But you're right, timing-wise, number 3, they've kind of happened in every decade with me as well. I was thinking about this the other day. So number 3, I was 40, and oh, God, it was a whirlwind romance. It was ridiculous. I am a romantic at heart. And we met online. So this was the first of them that I'd met online. We met online. And within 5 weeks, he was whisking me off to the Seychelles on this mystery holiday. I didn't even know where I was going.
I'd have married him.
Exactly, yeah. I didn't know where we were going until we got to the airport, and he told me, and he proposed in the most romantic but also a bit weird, where a huge diamond ring. It was the first time that someone had actually bought me my ring. I'd bought the other rings myself.
Oh.
I know, very sad.
No,
tragic.
I actually love that though.
Oh, really?
As well. It's quite empowering that you took ownership of that. Good for you.
It's because I was the only one that could afford to.
Again, good for you.
So this was really nice this time and so on. So yeah, within, I think it was about 10 or 11 weeks of meeting this guy, I say yes. And we plan a wedding, and then 6 weeks before, I realised it's a complete nutter. And yeah, I just call it all off. Sell the wedding dress, cancel the venue, wow. and move on. Yeah.
How did you handle that?
Do you know? I don't actually think that we spoke after that.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't think we actually spoke or anything. There was an argument over the engagement ring. I don't know whether or not you know this, but for anybody out there that listens to this, you don't own the engagement ring.
Really?
Yeah. So he asked, can you believe this? He asked for his engagement ring back, which is really my engagement ring at that point, I thought. And no, he was entitled to ask for it back because we didn't complete the commitment that the engagement ring was all about. So my solicitor said that I had to give the engagement ring back.
But if you go through with the marriage, it's then yours. Is that right? So this one's safe, yeah?
Yeah. So next time, go through with the marriage and then you get to keep the ring.
That's much more sensible. Yes.
It is, isn't it?
If it's all about the ring for you, which maybe it is for many people, then do that. Yeah.
Especially if it's the first one that you've been bought.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Gutted?
Oh, never mind. But on to number 4. Well, engagement number 4 at least.
Yeah. So the next one, all very sensible, you know, in our mid-40s, and we'd known each other for just under 3 years. And you'd think by then, with my track record, I would know what I was doing. No, apparently not. So leading up to, I mean, I'm saying this kind of like funnily because it is a way of kind of dealing with it all. But leading up to it, I had lots and lots of question marks. Things just were not adding up. And it's that thing where, what do they call it? There's an accounting term, you know, when you've already put so much money in that you don't want to then lose the money that you've spent. The term will come to me because I'm always quoting it. But yeah, it was a case of, I've put so much in, we've gone so far. I'm going to choose to believe his stories rather than what I'm pretty sure is actually going on here. And so we got married. And it's really weird. With each of the weddings, I've got like a smaller number of people coming to the wedding, and the weddings are more expensive. So we have this amazing wedding with just the two of us and 2 witnesses. And 10 weeks later, I'm asking for a divorce.
10 weeks? What happened to the 2 years, Claire?
I know. And the thing is, you can't even get a divorce after 10 weeks. You've got to wait a year.
Oh, oh, so what did you do? Just separate and...
I literally kicked him out that day.
Okay.
Well, I sent my dad round to do it.
Oh my goodness, bless you.
He was out, and that was it. And
yeah, wow. And you mentioned that you laugh about it now as a way of dealing with it, but it must have taken its toll, you know, over the years. Just because essentially we do want to find, maybe we do, I certainly do want to find one person that you're happy with. How have you dealt with it? How have you coped?
Yeah. So yeah, laughing about it is definitely one way. I think, you know, the first time I ran away. So I'm, as you can probably tell from my accent, so I'm from this area originally. The guy that I met was from here. We were at school together, and I ran away down to London for a job, just the outskirts of London, Buckinghamshire, for a job. And kind of, that was quite a good way. And I think it was very appropriate, actually, for that age to kind of just go, do you know what? I've got some growing up to do. You know, my mum and dad weren't best pleased. In terms of family back then, I think I was the only person from, you know, the much broader, not just the immediate, but the much broader family, you know, cousins and aunts and uncles and everybody, only the second person to get divorced. So it was, so we got married 87, we were going through divorce in 89, yeah. So it was quite unusual. I mean, it's an everyday occurrence now, but back then, well, it's an everyday occurrence for me anyway. But back then, Yeah, there was a bit of a stigma, which I guess I felt. You know, I mean, I was 20 when I walked out. So this time I actually left the house with him and I walked out, went back to my mum and dad's for a few weeks, and that was not pleasant. I then moved in with a girl on Surrey Street, I think it is in Middlesbrough, for about 6 weeks. That was a bit of fun. I met somebody immediately. Oh, my goodness.
Obviously.
It's just... I mean, I feel more embarrassed mentioning that now than I think I ever have in the last 30 odd years.
Oh, but why? Why the embarrassment?
Well, I think, you know, me now, I just see how ridiculous that was to go into that relationship so quickly. But at the time, I was just, I'm 20, I just want to have fun, you know. The relationship that I was in, you know, I met him when I was 14, married at 18, you know. We were on our second house and our second house and mortgage at the age of 20. Absolutely ridiculous. So
different times though, isn't it? Very different times
Yeah.
to today. Like that would be just unheard of.
Yeah.
So it might be hard for people to relate if they're a little bit younger, but it just was very different culture and time.
Yeah. I mean, I thought I was really grown up. I really did think I was really grown up at the time of making grown up decisions. But I look back now and I realise that I wasn't grown up at all, but I was making grown up decisions. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't have the capacity, the capability to do it well. And I didn't, and there'll be a theme that will probably emerge through this actually, I didn't have the people around me to support me to do that well because, you know, again, back then, and I'm not going to be overly critical about my parents or anything, but, you know, my dad, who I love to bits, you know, he was working, he was running his own business and so on, and he was a man and he had boys, so he could talk to boys about the boy stuff. I assume. I've never asked them if he did. But he certainly couldn't talk to a girl about girl stuff.
Yeah.
He's better at it now, and he's 81 next month. He's better at it now.
Oh.
And my mum was just always super critical, so you wouldn't go to her.
Okay, right. But yeah, I was going to ask that if there was a common theme to any of the relationships. But you know, you're not just, obviously you are just in a relationship with one person, but there's all the baggage, there's all the support, there's the people around you. And I mean, one thing that I'd say about my parents, they're incredibly supportive. They're always asking, can we help with childcare? Because they know the toll it takes, you know, raising children and trying to keep a happy marriage. But yeah, if you didn't have that, then that must have been incredibly tough.
Yeah, I mean, during the second one, the second marriage, I was living away. So in actual fact, so the person that I met on the rebound followed me down to London. And again, I was, you might argue again, you know, daft enough to not say, well, hang on a minute, I'm actually trying to reestablish myself, you know, start afresh and all the rest of it. And I didn't say that. And in some ways, I'm glad I didn't say that, actually, because it's a bit like, I mean, you haven't asked me the question yet, but I would say, I don't regret any of it.
You knew it was coming, didn't you?
Yeah, I don't regret any of it because, you know what, I wouldn't be sitting here, the person that I am today, and with all of the good, the bad and the ugly of my various different experiences in life. And not only to make, it sounds a bit naff, doesn't it, but me who I am, but specifically, I know we're not going to talk about work, but in my work, I think it's a massive advantage that I have a lot of experiences, and like I said, you know, there's good, there's bad, and there's downright ugly. And going back to your sort of question about the support thing, we actually had my daughter living away down in Buckinghamshire in our 20s with fundamentally no friends down there. I certainly didn't have friends down there because I just worked and worked. And, you know, family up here who, you know, all had their own stuff to deal with.
Mm-hmm. And we touched a little bit about how was the healing process? Were a lot of the decisions to kind of leave on your terms, or were you ever left brokenhearted?
Yeah, the decisions were always on my terms.
That's good, at least.
Yeah. Well, maybe good for me, maybe not for them.
Well, yeah.
In all fairness,
I don't know them.
Yeah. I don't really know. God, this is going to sound awful, and I'm probably tempting fate now with the current partner, but I don't really know what it's like to feel it on the other side. But I have thought about that not necessarily during any of those experiences, but I've definitely thought about that over the last few years of what it must be like to be on the other side of things. And I guess that's been part of the healing because, you know, the first one, I didn't heal. I just, you know, jumped into bed with somebody else and went down south, and I did make a new life, but I made a new life with somebody else. And then, you know, when that ended, I had a break for the first time, but it wasn't a very long break because, again, it was a bit like, oh my goodness, that relationship, that time of my life has been really, really hard work, quite traumatic. Again, I was in I want to have fun. I was 31. I want to have fun. And I had a lot of fun, Charlotte.
Oh, brilliant.
This was the beginning of all the dating apps. So, you know, and the song was out at the time, It's Raining Men. And that was my classic when we were out on a girls' night out. It was Raining Men. That was it. God, I'm getting warm now talking about it. It was an awful lot of fun. And I did have some relationships where we didn't get married or even engaged.
Brilliant. Good work.
But again, it's distraction, isn't it? It's distraction therapy, let's call it. And I didn't have any therapy around the first relationship or the second until my 40s. And so in terms of real healing, to answer that question, it was when I started to do therapy. Yeah.
Okay. And did you just suddenly realise a need for it, or were there certain things happening that could be linked or unpicked through therapy that linked back to earlier?
Yeah. I mean, I'd had some counselling, which was rubbish. I mean, there's good and there's bad.
Yeah, I've experienced both. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as with everything, you know, whether it's PR agencies or coaching or, you know, I don't know, bakers or something. You know, it's like, you know, there's good and bad. And I didn't have some great experiences with counselling. So I did try. I tried in my early and mid-30s because there's a big connection with stress and trauma. And I definitely had experienced stress and trauma on top of some childhood trauma as well, actually, that then can create problems in terms of our health. And I had some major health issues in my 30s. And it was actually when we were trying to work on the health issues, and specifically some issues I have with my spine and the pain related to that, that the doctor had advised counselling. And that's when we started to talk a little bit about all of this stuff. But it wasn't very good. And that then put me off, unfortunately, until I was in my late 40s. That was the first time I got some really good therapy through a good friend of mine, her sister, who she's a clinical psychologist. She's a doctor, PhD, brilliant, and it was EMDR therapy. That was the first therapy that I tried, and that pulled everything together. It pulled together. And makes so much sense. When I say this to you, you'll just like, oh yeah, I get it now. So one of the reasons why I was constantly in these relationships and not single for very long, and even one of the reasons why I stayed with one of them for definitely much longer than I should have, probably should have lasted only 2 years, it is to do with some early childhood experiences, and it's all about attachment, you know. I hadn't felt attachment to my parents, particularly to my mother. I hadn't felt loved, and so I was looking for that. I mean, it's quite classic stuff.
Absolutely.
That it may or may not surprise you, given the work that I do. I talk to people about this all the time. The amount of people that have some of the attachment issues, if you like, and they go on into their 20s, 30s, 40s, and it's not until, whether it be through therapy or coaching or, like I said, it could be attached to a medical condition or something, that someone starts to really put the spotlight on what's gone on.
That's really interesting, and I do believe that, and it's quite often a common cause. I mean, how did you fix that situation? Did you speak to your parents about it, or has the time passed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult one. I spoke to my father about things But neither one of us really wants to go there because I don't want him to have to hear stuff that it's too late for him to do anything about. And it's not his fault, you know. He was a man of his time and he was just doing his best and so on. My mother I don't actually have a relationship with anymore, although she is still alive. And I've never been able to talk to her about it because she would never have been able to cope with it. And unfortunately, she should have had counselling and therapy and what have you over the years, and didn't. And I've tried to get her to, and she wouldn't have been able to handle it.
So did you just have to walk away in the end?
I did, yeah. I did walk away, and it was the best thing I've ever done.
A very brave thing to do.
Do you know what let me ask you a question, yeah. Why do you think it's brave?
I think it's brave because quite often in situations like that, you're doing things, you're staying part of their lives for them rather than yourself, knowing a situation that someone I know is going through. And it seems very final and seems quite brutal to take that decision to walk away because you think, oh, I am their daughter or I am their son. And that's why I think it's brave, because it takes a lot of courage to do that. Say, I'm actually going to do something that I think is right for me rather than what I'm supposed to do as a good son or a good daughter. Yeah. Again, it's kind of conforming to what culture expects or society. That's why I think it's brave.
Yeah. So I can see that. I haven't considered it brave. I've considered it necessary. Because brave would have been probably doing it a long time ago, where it was less necessary then, and the brave would have been, what does society, what do my siblings, what do my cousins, my aunts, my uncles now think of me? How are other people judging me for my actions, but based on the very little knowledge that they actually have or care to even find out? But actually it got to the point where I know enough about, the importance of our mental health and preserving our mental health that it just got to a point where, my mental health was suffering acutely. Yeah. And therefore it was the only thing to do. It probably was survival instinct. And whilst I've thought about it, because I reflect quite a lot on things, I've thought about it since in terms of, was it the right thing to do? I've always come back with, this was about 2 years ago, I've always come back with, yes, it was the right thing to do. And now I actually don't even think about it particularly anymore because even, having thought about it several times and come to that conclusion, it's wasted. It's kind of negative energy, really, to go back there. And quite frankly, I'm 55 years old and I don't have a bucket list anymore. I have a list. And,
you can say that word.
Don't get me started because I'll be effing and jeffing every 2 minutes. But, I just think you get to that point where, at 55, and I have, again, with so many different things going on, I don't really care anymore what anybody else thinks. I particularly don't care what you think if you don't have all the facts.
Yeah. And so many people worry so much about those people that don't have all the facts. Yeah, I need to work harder on my opposite of bucket list as well. I guess with age, it comes... Are you okay?
Cough.
The older I get, I do kind of think a little bit more along those lines of, it doesn't matter, don't care what they think. But certainly in my younger days, overthought everything, and I still do to a certain point. But yeah, I love that mindset.
Excuse me.
Don't worry.
This is a cold that just won't go.
Take your time.
I'm not crying, honestly.
Well, you'd be perfectly fine to cry. They're quite deep subjects. But...
Well, you say that. I've done my... excuse me. I've done my crying. And this literally is not me getting upset. This happened yesterday at work as well with somebody. Oh, right. Yeah, I've done my crying. I'm really happy to go there and have that massive emotional release, whether it be a swear, shout, within a safe environment. This would be ideal, actually. Throw things, just get the emotion out. And again, that's something that I didn't do in my 20s, 30s, early 40s, but it's something that I've learned to do now. And also to talk it out, to talk through the things that have gone on. And, you can self-reflect in private. This is almost a bit of self-reflection as well. But getting things out, linking back to the medical issues, again, it's massively helpful to be able to release the emotions, and then you release all of the various different issues. And a lot of mine have been to do with pain related to my back, knees, hips, neck, everything, and some immune issues as well. And releasing helps. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've learned that the hard way as well, continuing to do so as well. And we touched on that stigma. We talked about in the 80s there was definitely a stigma attached to divorce. Do you think there is now?
I don't think there's a stigma, but I do think some individuals would struggle with it. I mean, here's the funny thing. My dad, at 18... the reason why one of the things he said when he was so adamant, if we got this house, he said, "You're not," and I don't know anybody else that's ever used this expression ever, "you're not living over the brush. You need to get married." So apparently this term, living over the brush, is, living in sin, living together without being married.
Right.
He was that strict about that. And he has been living over the brush for about the last 26 years.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't heard that phrase before either, but I might start using it, living over the brush.
Yeah, I mean, I said what I said about people in my family being divorced. Both of my brothers have been divorced, one of them twice. My mum and dad, clearly, therefore, are divorced. Other cousins and so on. Yeah, it's kind of a bit weird if you manage to stay together, isn't it?
I know. Yeah, it's like the opposite problem to the 80s. Or not a problem, but it's just people are more free to do what they want. I think there's less judgment, and that's nice, I think. For all, I'm married, and I gave myself a hard time questioning myself, are you sure this is what you want to do? Because I did want to take it seriously at the same time. But, things can change, people can change, people can move apart, and it's about growing together at the same rate, and that changes. And also, marriages aren't sunshine and rainbows. There's a lot of compromise. There's people, and the way my husband and I look at it is sometimes they're hard work. And you've got to put that hard work in, and sometimes treat it as unromantic as this sounds, like a business sometimes. Scheduling time.
Really?
That's the stage we're at with children. Whether that's like the next stage up to divorce, we don't know. But, booking in time, because we find less and less happens spontaneously when you've got children, especially young children. Yeah. So making sure we're having date nights, making sure we're just like, because most evenings I work, because I'm trying to spend as much time as possible with my children, like when they pick them up from school and on a morning. So, it's challenging. And I think not enough people, certainly maybe 20, 30 years ago, realised that. And obviously then there was the external pressures of you can't live over the brush. So I'm going to definitely keep that phrase. It's just, I think it is hard work. Obviously it has to be still lovely as well at the same time and not too much hard work. But getting that balance right, rather than just thinking everything just happens naturally.
And I think, in fairness, one of my issues was the fact that, I am a romantic. I mean, come on, I'm covered in pink. I am a romantic still, despite all of that. But actually possibly having too high expectations of things maybe was, if I was to blame in anything ever, good grief. Can I actually believe that I'm admitting to any of this? But in all seriousness, having quite high expectations of them, of the relationship, of myself, that was definitely one of my big problems in the past. And now it's only a small problem, but it's still there, and I'm like constantly working on it. But I think, but there's something going on at the moment in terms of, when we talk about business leaders, the world that we live in now, we have to make decisions from a leadership perspective, we have to make them really quickly. And then if they're the wrong decision, we have to make another decision really quickly. And so we might kind of like laugh about I can't make a marriage last any longer than 2 years. And, there's marriage and then there's divorce and there's engagements and then there's, let's actually not get married. If you're good at making decisions, you've also got to be good at making the decisions that go, that was a bad decision. Mm-hmm. And so, again, that's another reason why I don't have regrets particularly, is because I look back on all of those relationships and I think, well, at least I made those decisions to get out. I think the worst thing these days is if we've still got people that are worrying about the judgment of others, and that's why they're staying together, and they're miserable, and we've got one life, and it's really bloody short.
Yeah.
At 55, I'm starting to realise just how short that is, and it's scary.
Yeah. I turn 40 next month, and it's really started making me question about that. And you've got to be happy, otherwise, what is the point?
Yeah.
But I love that you've kind of gone like that, married and divorced, and worn your heart on your sleeve, because, again, I don't think there's enough of that at the minute. It's like, what would you do if you didn't let fear get in the way of of your life? You'd make so many more kind of decisions like that, be more spontaneous, more playful, and I think that's important about life as well.
Yeah.
And I think, again, if more people talked about this rather than seeing it as some sort of shameful thing that they have to hide, then more people would feel that it's okay to do it.
Yeah.
So, good for you talking about it. And
in fact, you've just described me actually in a nutshell, in the sense of it's like, I don't let fears get in the way. Or if I do fear something, I'll do it. If there's something that I fear, like I'm doing something at the moment. I'm only into week 3 of training to do some stand-up comedy.
Amazing.
I know, and it, it's kind of like that would be a really scary thing to do. Actually, find out if I can be funny. It's not about the standing up speaking to people. It's can you do it and actually make people laugh. So it's like, well, try. Do you know what I mean? It's like if there's something there that I think would be quite frightening, I'm quite prepared to have a go, as long as I can physically do it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure you can. It's something I'd love to do as well. So you'll have to keep me posted on how that's going. And final question on the topic of marriage: would you ever get married again?
Oh, absolutely.
Brilliant. I expected that answer. Lovely. Would you get divorced again?
Well, I'd like to think that if I were to get married again, I'd like to think that it's to the current one, and I'd like to think that therefore I wasn't going to get divorced because, again, I'm a romantic. That's how I've gone into all of them.
Which is nice. I know some friends, more than one, where they've walked down the aisle and known they weren't the right person. They're probably going to get divorced quite soon after, and they did.
Yeah. So I definitely would.
Brilliant. That's good to know. And on to the topic of the current partner.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that he's 20 years younger than you. Mm-hmm. And I just wondered, how do people typically react when they hear that?
Well, how did you react?
So I said, good for you, Claire. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned what you're about to probably say now. And I did think, well, I felt a little bit of shame of how I reacted like that. Because like you said, well, good for him.
Yeah.
So do you want to explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I mean, people always say, good for you. Like, I've kind of like, won some sort of trophy or something like that. And I mean, I have in many ways because, of all the different relationships that I've had, this is by far the best relationship that I've ever been in. But yeah, it's funny, and people concentrate on the sort of like the physical side of things as well. There's an assumption that I've got this tall, dark, handsome, well built in all ways man, that's going to want to jump into bed every 2 minutes and so on. And some of that is true.
Good.
But I'm not going to share which bits of that are true. But, people's minds go there sort of straight away. And I think, again, it's one of those things to say, isn't it? They don't kind of know how to react, so they kind of react in that way. And then sometimes with some of my friends, they might get into the nitty-gritty of it and get interested in. In fact, one of my friends, we were down in Cardiff recently, and we were both there actually, and he was really intrigued about, well, how do finances work, and how does what about retirement? You know, how's that going to work? And, you know, Jay's still young enough to decide that he wants children. And I'm way too old to be able to produce them for him. And to be quite frank, way too old to actually want to look after any with him. But you know, that's still a possibility. It's not what he says he wants right now. But we've both discussed, you know, at 35, he's almost 36, that could change. Mm-hmm. And then what do you do about that? So when we get into the serious stuff, people are, you know, there's quite a lot of intrigue around that. But yeah, most of it tends to be all about the physical, which is fine. Thank you very much for asking.
I'm glad to know. I'm glad to hear that. I'm just thinking about it more. The reason I say good for you is more commonly, I often hear that is the man, the male in the relationship that has a partner that's 20 years younger. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm just always for a little bit of feminism. So I'm just like, well, but then still, you know, why do I think that way?
Yeah.
But yeah, and were you initially aware of the age difference when you met? So how did you meet?
I was aware of it. This is going to sound terrible, but I was aware of it because I was very familiar with Match.com and the likes at the point in time which I went on Match looking for a man aged 28 to 35.
Love it.
This is 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I was 49. But I was not looking for a man for me. In fact, I'd only just stepped away from a relationship 3 days before and I was looking for my daughter. I mean, you'd think that she'd have the sense not to ask me to look for somebody with my history. But nevertheless, she obviously trusted me somehow. And so literally I started looking for someone for my daughter and I reached out and I kind of like tapped away when I saw his profile and I thought, tick, 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 tick. And yes, Charlotte, there was a tiny bit of me that was thinking for myself, tick, 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 tick. But not really thinking because I didn't think that would be a possibility and my focus was for my daughter. But I've got to admit there was probably a tiny bit. Anyways. And so I messaged like immediately saying, please don't panic. I'm messaging you on behalf of my daughter. And then I start to explain what's going on. And we start a dialogue. So yes, I absolutely, he was 30 at the time and I knew he was 30. And actually, he was one of the very few men that doesn't lie about their age on these things.
Yeah.
In my experience, most of them lie about their height, their age, their income. So yes, so I knew, but I wasn't intending for him to be mine, as it were. But we got on really very well while I'm, you know, finding out all about him for my daughter. He lived 3 miles away from me, an hour away from her. He worked away during the week. By the time I got to share with her, because at the time she was living an hour away from me, share with her, this is the profile of this guy. He was the only one I bothered with, actually. He sounds amazing. We've chatted. We'd even done the WhatsApp before I got to speak to her. And she just looked at it all and she went, not really doing it for me. And in fact, I think that's the first time I've said that out loud as well. Not really doing it for me. And he works away during the week and he lives too far away anyway. And so thanks, but no thanks. And then I'm left thinking, oh, shit. I've now got to go back to him, who'd obviously remained interested in the prospect, and let him know that he's been rejected before they've even met, which I did. I'm sure it was very diplomatic and so on. And he didn't seem to mind, which was weird back then, but not so weird now. Now that I realise that actually all along he'd been more interested in me than he had been in the prospect of meeting my daughter.
It's a good job your daughter wasn't interested.
I know. Actually, we haven't discussed that. We should discuss that. What would have happened had that been the case? But we'd been chatting long enough to, for me to say, should we have a coffee? And the coffee turned into 2 coffees and lunch at Muse, and 4 hours later, we're arranging a second date, yeah.
Oh, I love it. And did you have any hesitations about the age difference at that stage?
Well, no, because I wasn't thinking relationship, I was thinking fun.
Oh, okay. I see where you're thinking. Brilliant.
You know, I mean, and when I say fun, again, I'm not necessarily going back to the physical side of things. I was thinking, I mean, I dated someone a lot younger in the past. So when I was 31, I'd met someone who's 20 going on 21, and we were together on and off for 4 years. So, like, you know, I kind of like younger men in the main. But it was more, I mean, this is a generation difference. And I just liked him. And, you know, he used to say back then all the time, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but he used to say all the time that he was weird. He referred to himself as weird all the time. And he's not weird. He's an engineer. I mean, if we had an audience, we might get a laugh there. But anyway, he's not weird. He's an engineer.
My husband's kind of an engineer. He's weird. So
We are quite opposites. You know, he's much more introverted. In fact, he's very introverted, but tries very hard to be extroverted when it's a social occasion and so on. I'm much more extroverted. You know, we have some quite different interests, but we have some that are the same and so on. And I just thought it'd be fun just to be with someone who I hadn't intended to have a relationship with, who I just completely enjoyed his company. And I was desperate to kiss him as well on that first date. So, you know.
Oh, I think it's lovely. And, you know, there's that old cheesy saying that age is just a number. And I really do think it is. I've got, again, friends, people I know that are in lots of different relationships, different dynamics, whether it's the male older, the female older. And, yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
But again, society sometimes says, oh, you shouldn't be with him. He's too old or he's too young. Yeah. And, just do what you fancy.
Yeah. Who cares what society thinks? I mean, who are society?
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry to interrupt, but just a quick word about our sponsor, Be Daily. I've been subscribing to the Be Daily now since starting my business. It provides relevant and informative information directly to my inbox, not just about the North East, but also national news. If you're interested in subscribing, we'll put the link in the description box so you can get the business news directly to your inbox. Now back to the podcast.
Are there any messages? Because there could be someone out there that's perhaps considering a relationship with someone much older, much younger than them.
Yeah.
But they're thinking, I can't do it because of what other people think. What would you say to them?
Oh, my God. If it's about what other people think, who gives a shit what other people think? I mean, end of. That's just... And I don't even care if that's your daughter, you know, your parents, your best friend. You know, it doesn't matter what they think. They're not in the relationship. And even if you share a lot with them, they still don't have all the information, you know. In fact, you know, your unconscious has a lot of the information about what's right and what's wrong and so on. We should actually listen to that a lot more. I definitely should listen to that a lot more. And I have been latterly. But I think it's with relationships generally, actually. It's not about the age and it's not about, you know, it's not about any given specific, actually. Like, for me, in my own experience now, obviously, of which I've got a fair bit, it's about being different yet equal. And the one thing that you really must have that's the same is the same values.
I agree.
So I've eventually worked that out. And that's actually why I think this one's going to last. Because whilst there is this massive age difference... we're absolutely equal. You know, people... I asked him about this, actually. He worried that people would think he was like a gold digger, you know?
Right.
Because, you know, not many 30-year-olds would have the income that he had, the money that he'd, you know, put away. You know, he had his own 4-bedroom house when we met. So he wasn't coming into this living in his mum and dad's back bedroom. He had a decent job, decent income. And so there wasn't a massive inequality there. We have absolutely the same values. And, yeah, that makes the biggest difference. So, yeah, just everyone's got their own shit to deal with. And so, therefore, their perception of things and their judgment, I don't think you should take into account personally.
Brilliant answer, and totally agree with the values thing. Again, I sound like a really boring partner in a relationship, but again, I learned that through the business side of things. You know, we had to match our values to the clients, values to team members that we recruited, and obviously subconsciously I'd done that anyway with my partner, but it made it resonate a little bit more, the kind of joint values.
But yeah. I'm just thinking, when you're saying all this about the business thing, maybe people should go and do an MBA or something before they're allowed to get married.
Very good idea. Yeah. Yes, that would be my recommendation. So that's where you went wrong, Claire.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because I did my MBA at 46 years old.
Right.
So maybe, and to be quite frank, for me personally, it didn't give me an awful lot, but maybe that's one of the things it gave me.
Yeah. Brilliant. Great advice. If you're struggling in a relationship, go and get an MBA or start your own business. Anything that gives you that business, those business skills that are very transferable to marriage.
Yeah, totally.
Brilliant. Well, now we've established that. We'll move on to one of your relationships that ended for not a very good reason, domestic violence. So can you share with us what you feel comfortable on that matter?
Yeah. It's not a difficult one to talk about from the perspective of I have issues talking about it. I don't. I'm a complete open book. But I want to be sensitive around it because the other person that was in the relationship, they're not a bad person. They did bad things back then, but they're not a bad person. And so I ended the relationship ultimately because the dynamic within the relationship, part of which was the domestic abuse, which wasn't always just physical. In fact, more of it is the mental. It's the anticipation of someone kicking off. In my experience, that was the worst thing.
Right.
So never really knowing what sort of day you were going to have, what sort of night you were going to have. Going to bed at night and not knowing if you would be woken up in the middle of the night and something was obviously going to kick off. And so living for way too many years, actually, on eggshells and, trying to be a mother, trying to do a job. And actually, I had a very big job back then as well. I was literally the breadwinner in the family and so on. It was just a very, very hard time. And in the end, realising that I couldn't fix him or us, I had to accept and I had to end the relationship. And it was difficult for many, many years afterwards. It was really difficult because I held on to all of the pain, the anguish, what felt like lost years. I allowed myself to feel like a victim to it for quite a long time, even though on the surface I wasn't. No one would have thought that at all. But I allowed myself to. And it wasn't until I actually started seeing his perspective on things that I kind of, that balancing act of, okay, so why did he behave the way he behaved? Again, going back to, he isn't a bad person, but he behaved very badly. Why was that? And now that I have more empathy towards him and more of an understanding of that difference between the person and the behaviour, I've managed to let all of that, painful stuff go. And that was really therapeutic. And that was one of the things that I dealt with when I had the therapy, about 7, 8 years ago.
Okay, and you had a great analogy that you shared with me just before the podcast about the snake and the venom, the bite. Could you share that?
Yeah. It's one of the things I came across when I was writing my book, and because a lot about relationships in the book, funnily enough. So they talk about being afraid of being bitten by a snake, but actually it's not the snake bite that kills you. It's when you allow the venom to stay in you. So that's why they have this thing about sucking the venom out. And that just made so much sense to me. I needed to lose the venom that I was holding on to. And, at that point, I'd held on to the venom for, almost 2 decades. I mean, you imagine carrying that around, all of that anger. And I didn't feel like a victim in life, but I felt a victim in that relationship. And all sorts of other things, holding all of that baggage, it's poisonous, and great to let go of it. And it's been, and actually I kind of said I wasn't going to make it clear what the relationship was, but actually it probably makes sense given what I've said. I didn't really have to have any direct contact with him after we'd split up. You know, we did things through third parties and lots of solicitors getting involved and all sorts. It was a very, very messy, horrible time for quite a few years. But there came a point a few years ago where I was very likely going to have to be in a room with him on family occasions and so on. And thankfully by then I'd done the work for that to be okay. And I can honestly say now that whilst I don't forget anything, it's in there, I don't forget anything, I can absolutely forgive.
Brilliant. Yeah. How have you learned to kind of do that and build the trust in others and other relationships?
Two separate answers for that, because the forgiveness thing is seeing him change. There is, you know, he has changed over time. I've kind of witnessed that indirectly. Everything that I've learned about human behaviour and human beings, I've learned a lot over the last 10 years in particular, studying psychology and neuroscience and so on, and actually being on the receiving end of therapy, learning therapeutic approaches myself or in my work and so on. So all of that allows me to forgive. And to be quite frank, there is something, and I know it's quite a religious thing when they talk about, you know, you must forgive, you'll feel better if you forgive. I can't say you will, but I did. I absolutely have felt better for forgiving. There's going to be a second answer that I was going to give to that. What was the second part of your question?
About rebuilding trust in other partners.
Yeah, well, I just trust people until they give me enough reason not to trust them. Now, it's interesting because actually my third husband gave me lots of reason not to trust him, and I still trusted him. That's how much I trust people. You know, you can let me down and let me down and let me down. You can lie to me and lie to me and lie to me. And I still trust you until there's a final straw. And I wouldn't change that about me either.
Yeah, for all it can get you into trouble, it's still such a lovely quality. Yeah. Better that way than always untrusting and learning to trust them.
Yeah.
And any red flags that started to appear before the domestic abuse happened, just that others might be able to look out for?
Well, in our particular case, I would say first things first, you know, he started to drink too much.
Right.
Okay. And I think that's probably a classic sign as well. Yeah. So any kind of a behaviour that they're doing to an extreme is actually suggesting that they have a problem with something. Mm-hmm. I don't know, because I've never asked him about kind of like, were these things connected? So anything I'm going to say now is my assumption on what went on. But my assumption is that, he was in an environment that lent itself, again, we're going back to the very late 80s and early 90s, an environment that lent itself to drinking on a lunchtime, okay, and then coming back and then drinking on a night, and then drinking till 3 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, so the alcohol piece was a big part of our story, definitely. But the alcohol piece, I think, was also, and the reason why it got as bad as it did, I think, was because there was an inequality between us. I had a big, really good job. I was holding it down. I was doing really well. I was successful in my career. I was successfully, you know, doing all the things to maintain the family and so on. And he was, let's just say, less so. Yeah, and that's got to, and those days as well, feel even more of a pressure for the man when it's that way around. I don't think it feels, I don't know, I'd have to ask more men, maybe quite as much of a pressure these days. So if we were to meet these days with that sort of inequality, let's say, in our earnings and our success through work, then maybe it would be different. But back then, I think he struggled with that. I think it was part of it. Because, he used to say things like, it's your fault, which, again, is quite hard to take. And when you're told it's your fault, that, again, is part of the whole abuse thing. You're continually told it's your fault, so you feel the need to make things right, to fix things, and so on. And actually, I just think we met, we weren't the right people to be together. I was on the rebound, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, probably two things. If there's lots of alcohol, really watch out for that, because if people drink way too much, then the truth of their feelings comes out, but also they're not able to then manage those feelings effectively. And his way was to lash out, both verbally, which was horrific, and then physically as well.
Yeah, and then there's that second part of why do they need to drink so much? Maybe there's another issue as well. But
yeah.
And
And get help. I mean, do you know what, Charlotte? This is the biggest thing is we didn't get help. I used to ask him to go to AA. I don't know if he ever did, but not while we were together. And I did not go and ask. I asked for help a couple of times from my mother, and I got told things like, well, what are you doing wrong to provoke him?
Wow.
Yes, absolutely. What are you, in the middle of the night, I ran across Ingleby Barwick to see my mother to say, he's kicking off, etc., and he's absolutely paralytic drunk, come in at 2:00 in the morning. And she sent me back there. So, yeah, I then struggled to ask for help for many more years up until recently when I have no problem asking for help.
Good. That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Goodness me, horrific. Thank you for going there. Just seeing the time, there's so many topics to talk about, Claire. We'll just touch on this subject about the becoming a grandmother.
Oh my goodness,
because most people, when they're told they're going to become a grandmother, they're elated, full of joy, happiness. But that wasn't the case for you, was it?
Oh God, I feel awful about this now, because my daughter might only have one child in her life, and my reaction was not great. But Charlotte, was my reaction. What can I do? I'm human. So at 30, what should she have been? Anyway, 31 years old, my daughter and her other half, they're not married, they were engaged at the time, rock up after we've just come back from Spain or something on a long weekend, Jay and I. Rock up, we've got news, show us the, photograph of the scan and everything. And I'm like, okay. And I think I might have said some of the right things, but it was very clear. I was a bit shocked and I was a bit unhappy. And quite honestly, I know what I was unhappy about. I was unhappy first and foremost, and it sounds really immature. Maybe I'm really immature. But the other grandparents had been told first. I get it with, her other half's mum and dad. Fine, it was more convenient to tell them first. I don't have an issue with that. But given all the history with her dad, he was told first over me. And I found that really, really hard. Again, when I look about it now, I think, do you know what? It didn't really matter. But there was there was an emotional part of me that just really connected with that at the time. So I found that difficult. And then also, I was shocked that she hadn't consulted me, Charlotte. I mean, how dare she, at 30-something years old, not consult me on this? She'd consulted me, I think, on pretty much everything in her life up till then, and I hadn't been consulted, and I'm just informed of something. And then it's like your life, you've chosen for your life to change dramatically. I haven't chosen for my life to change dramatically, but apparently it's going to. And then, of course, there was the whole thing going back to a relationship with somebody that's 20 years younger, that at the moment pretty much thinks there's no chance he wants children. And all of a sudden, we're going to have a child in the house and in our dynamic as a family, as a couple. And he's going to be a, 34-year-old grandpa. It was all just a bit much. Yeah.
I think you're just being so honest. There's a lot of people that might have felt those things but just not expressed them. And then also the identity of being a grandma as well, or granny or gran, whatever you prefer to call yourself.
Well, none of them.
Claire.
Well, it's changed slightly since the last time I spoke to you. So everyone kept saying, one of the first questions when I told anybody or when they found out they'd seen it on Facebook or whatever, they would message me or say to me straight away, now then, Granny, now then, Grandma Claire. And I'd be like, fuck off. I am just... I have such a strong sense of my identity, and it's not an old woman. And that's how I say any of those labels, old woman. And I want to be anything other than that. So I was saying, why can't I be called Claire? And my daughter was like, well, no, because I've never called you that. And I know it's quite trendy these days to like call your, parent by their first name. So I didn't want to be called Claire. Sorry, she didn't want me to be called Claire. I was like, well, if you're kind of like, playing with Freya, she's called now. If you're playing with Freya and you want to reference me, could you not say, my mum's coming? My mum's coming. Or you're going to go to my mum's today to be looked after or whatever. And then she'll shorten that, won't she? As she sort of gets older, it'll be like Mima or my mum or I don't know, whatever. Anyway, again, that wasn't good enough. So
I can understand that.
Well, I looked up different names and I liked Lola. Lola is Filipino. I was like, Lola, she was a showgirl. Identity-wise, I was like, okay with that. She said, no, she wouldn't have that.
You'd rather be a showgirl than a gran.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That says everything, Charlotte. Anyway, long story short, Emily or I, or somewhere along the line, we came up with Grammy. I can't say I particularly like it, but I'm going to lump it. She's even bought me the bracelet. I reckon she went out and bought this bracelet that says Grammy on it straight away so that she could literally identity tag me.
Oh, it is really interesting though. I struggled a little bit when first thinking about becoming a mum, that, which I'm just so proud to be now, but it took a little while of adjustment. So I can understand that from your point of view. But right, we need to get on to the regular 10 questions, and these are quick fire rounds. So scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. How would you rate yourself at how attractive you are, good looking?
Okay. We discussed this at the weekend. We agreed I'm probably a 7 to 8. That's what we said. And even that sounds really boastful.
It does not.
But we actually sat down in the Lake District and discussed all these questions. So,
amazing.
7 to 8.
Brilliant. How funny are you?
Well, we're going to find out when I do my stand-up. Apparently, I'm only a 5 so far.
Okay. Improvement needed for stand-up then. Cooking?
Again, a 5 because I can cook, but I don't cook.
I can't and I won't. Singing?
Oh, God. I think he gave me a 2, and I think I'd have to agree. I'm absolutely tone deaf. My other half's a musician by
lovely.
evenings and weekends and so on. And he tells me I'm tone deaf and I have no rhythm.
Right, okay. That's a shame. Tolerance to alcohol?
Probably a 2. I don't drink very much at all. And when I do have a drink, it affects me straight away.
Me too. Parenting skills?
Well, apart from the incident where I had the bad reaction to being, granny, grandma or Grammy or whatever, I would say about a 9.
Oh, brilliant. How good a friend are you?
I would say actually I was probably a 9 again on friend. I have very few people that I would call real friends, but I would do anything for them, and yeah.
Oh, lovely. How intelligent are you?
I would say get a 9. I'm not giving any 10s out, am I? No. That's weird. I normally do extremes.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to say a 9 actually. Yeah.
Okay, great. How kind are you?
Do you know what? That might be a 10. That actually
Brilliant.
might be
got
a 10.
The 10.
Jay did actually say that was a 10. Yeah, maybe too kind sometimes as well.
The most common answer for 10 is for the next question. How good at sex you are?
Well, we had a long conversation about that.
Good.
And we decided that I was probably a 10 when we first met. And then I probably declined. Again, but quality, not quantity. Is that right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So 10 for quality, maybe a 5 for quantity. But I think that's all of us, if we're honest.
Oh, totally.
If we're really honest.
I think that's natural when you start a new relationship.
Yeah.
There's more sex and then it declines, and especially when you have children.
Yeah. Well, we haven't obviously got grandchildren now. But and it's funny actually because he used to live away. And this thing about, makes heart. And now we're together a lot. And, when you've got it on tap.
Oh, totally. Why does it work that way?
Yeah, exactly.
But it so does, totally. Claire, you've been amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, it's Ryan from Harvey & Hugo, and I am the videographer here. So, are you looking for a new way to stand out in today's crowded digital landscape? Well, look no further than podcasting. Here at Harvey & Hugo, we specialise in creating and producing high-quality podcasts that engage and inspire audiences. And with our comprehensive production services, we'll take care of all the technical details, from the recording and the editing to the distribution and the promotion. With millions of listeners tuning in every day, it's the perfect time to start connecting with them on a deeper level. Let Harvey & Hugo help you unlock the power of podcasting and take your message to the next level.